Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'd like to thank the organizers for this opportunity to present our view on the innovations in medicine. As speaking from one of the centers that is oriented at translating the science into practice, I'd like to give you a short retrospective, and I'd also like to pay attention to the experience and expertise of our colleagues that could be taken into account jointly by us while we're developing our own methods. So let's start from something positive. You've probably seen this picture from the Nature. That's how our colleagues from the National Institute of Health in the USA saw the innovations in the medicine in 2008. So this was a death valley, according to their description, because of the gap and the verge between the science and the practice. So you see the skeleton somewhere below. This should probably be the innovator. So at that point of time, the substances and molecules were under view, and we tried to take a short look of that from the right corner point of view, so to say, from the point where the doctor and the patients are located, from the clinical practice point of view. And we try to understand how we can promote the integration of innovations and how we can extend the hands to the researchers, of course, to the extent that we can actually offer according to our arm's length. The positive news is that we have some analysis because our colleagues have been in the front line of that, and they've already faced some obstacles, and we did have an opportunity to analyze them. So how did we actually come here to this kind of a life? Let's have a retrospective look. In 1950s and 60s of the previous century, as you see, the fundamental clinical trials have been quite interconnected during those times, and it changed significantly with a breakthrough in molecular biology. And on the left graph, you can see the divergence over time up to 2005, how the fundamental studies and medical studies have diverged. So the line below is the medical studies, and the lower up is the scientific studies, fundamental ones. And to illustrate this gap, I'd like to offer you to take a look at the right graph. This is the pharmaceutical industry. The number of the limited studies and the new molecular entity output. What conclusion can we draw from the heritage of this past 20 years? Judging by the overview assessment, over here you can see the link to the source itself. We can see that less than 25% of the discoveries, promising discoveries in the biomech industry, are resulting from the randomized studies. And less than 10% of them are applied to real practice. So speaking very roughly and speaking about the conversion, I'd say that it would amount to 2.5% from the whole volume of the development and research. But after speaking to the accelerators that are leading in the European market in this field, we can actually feel that their interest to the project in this field starts with a level of conversion not less than 5%. What are the challenges for the century are we facing? For the first 20 years? Well, the technologies are changing, and here I'm talking about the frequency of its changes. So we have a shorter cycle now here from 2 to 4 years. You can also see the number of medical procedures and medications, the drugs that have been registered over this period of time. And speaking globally, each 7 or 8 years, we see some breakthrough in the field of these technologies, and it determines the development of the medical science. But overall speaking, the progress is ahead of the understanding of its real efficiency of all these technologies. And we'll see it further. What are the risks that we are facing? What are the risks when we take the medical science as a standard business process? Here you can see the quote by Yaroslav Shichman. He's representing the international medical cluster that is based in Moscow. And that's how he defines the maximum risk. This is about production of not those medications and drugs that are really necessary for the humanity, but of those that would be selling well. And so this will lead to the destruction of the whole model of the pharmaceutical industry. So no less, no more. Quite often we call it lost in translation term. In the pharmaceutical industry, this looks like that. More than 80% of drugs are not introduced into the market because they're too toxic or not efficient, and 50% of them are cut during the third phase. And one of these factors is the reputation, the value of those experts who perform as the chief scientists during this third phase. And they do not want to adjust the protocol to the particular drug. Now let's talk about peculiarities in the fundamental clinical trials. In our field, in the field of neurosciences and psychopathology. And here we can see the quote about real people. So the psychiatry is different from other medical areas because it's focusing not only on separate systems or within a human being, but on the whole diversity of humans in general. And if we try to understand what it actually means right now, how can we test it? We see the very high level of resistance to a therapy, despite the emergence of new medications, of new methods. To overcome this resistance, it's very difficult because there are still some group of patients that are not susceptible to this therapy, that are not responding well. And another figure that we can see here, it's quite demonstrative. This is the effect of a placebo, up to 40%. Why is it important to compare it with the placebo? If a medication or a technology provokes less side effects with a comparative clinical efficiency, and if we compare it to the medications that are currently in the market, this will influence the loyalty of the patients to this therapy. As you know, the side effects of some medications in the field of psychiatry is quite high, and when it comes to the efficiency, well, this is not that high. So the placebo is the kind of a control point for us to calculate all this. Here, let's talk about obstacles that our colleagues from Northern Western cluster and our colleagues identify those obstacles as the most significant. And here I highlighted the issues that we can influence, that we can overcome right here and right now. Those are the insufficient contacts between scientists and doctors, and the next one in blue as well, in correlation between real conditions of the clinic and the design of clinical research. For example, in a medical protocol, somebody added a patient with a arrhythmia with an implanted cardiostimulator to offset such a significant side effect as a heart stop, cardiac stop. And now let's talk about the translational medicine. So here you can see the keywords, the introduction of the most important developments into the clinical practice, etc. And also, Evgeny Vladimirovich Shlachtov advises us to follow the principles that are very important in practice. This is about the quality of research, the management, and then our constructive dialogue. Here we can see the criteria of a translational research in medicine. I believe that the most significant one here, among all of them, is the formulation of the scientific hypothesis before all the stages of the experiment, and that analysis with a check against the proof of the concept. And the next one is the economic feasibility study, together with the financial and medico-social significance. And as a conclusion, what's the difference of the scientific methodology from the translational medicine? We are oriented at result, taking into account the financial and the market factor. And the goals at the top level, I believe that we should also voice them. This is the cut of the introduction of theory into practice by 2 times. So now this period extends from 10 to 15 years, and we are aiming at the period from 5 to 7 years. Of course, we are highly dependent on the technology and the medication itself. But judging by the real data, we still believe that 15 years it's a more realistic period of time. As to the regulation, here you can see the regulatory acts that determine the work in the field of translational medicine and personalized medicine. This is one of the segments where the translation aspect will be developing most actively. Now you can see that we are talking about the regulation of innovations. This is just at the top level. And there are detailed regulatory acts only across some kinds of directions, not all of them. Fortunately, I cannot be boasting with significant success in that respect, because our development, the concept on the development of centers of prevention and providing for medical health, we've slowed down a little bit. And also, together with our colleagues, we are reviewing the document on the reasonable expertise. Unfortunately, we had to issue a negative assessment because we didn't see any risk analysis over there, and we didn't see the model of management when it comes to the critical risks. But let's have a look at some kind of positive news. We have national project, healthcare, that also encompasses the federal project. This is about the development of the network of national research centers and integration of medical technologies. And here we can see a separate task, which is to include in the clinical recommendations not less than 60 new methods of prevention, diagnostics, treatment, and rehabilitation by 2025. Speaking about the innovation methods. And there's a subsequent order from the Ministry of Healthcare, the item 1, and it orders us. You can also see the keywords highlighted here. We need to increase the quality, develop innovations, and to create conditions for sustainable demand and integration of these innovations. One needs to say that the order has been executed, the center network has been deployed, And actually, you can demand from any of these units within the network, you can demand the realization of your own project. However, this item hasn't been detailed when it comes to the resources and how it should also be done, actually. A little bit later, I'll also show the position of the regulator related to this issue, and just yesterday it was presented at an international conference. Now I'd like to say a couple of words about our center. The National Research Center of Psychiatry and Neurology, named after Bekhterev. So here you can see the areas. So, and we cover 40 subjects, Northern, Western, Southern one, Privolzhsky one, and Severokavkazsky Federal Region. And when it comes to the psychiatry, we actually cover all regions in the Russian Federation from 2021. And also I included our mission here, which is to improve the psychological health of our compatriots, promoting harmonization of interaction between a human being and the external environment by the use of novel scientific achievements in the field of psychological health. And here you can see the opportunities and the criteria when it comes to the translation of medical technologies with the help of our center and other centers. I believe that for you, as for the developers of interfaces, I believe that you'll be mostly interested in the testing of medical equipment and approbation of this equipment. And I'd like to separately say that the level of research can approach such levels as multicentral, randomized and controlled ones. Also, we could develop an ethical expertise by the local committee, proceeding from the protocols, and we can also develop some clinical and economic recommendations. And on the right, in here, you can see the criteria that we are currently using based on the Order 433 by the Ministry of Healthcare to assess the efficiency of the technologies. This is not a full list of the criteria, of course, because in addition to the financial costs, we also assess the clinical efficiency, the security, the value of the method itself, and we also assess such aspects as the clinical and economic efficiency, as the reduction of the number of hospitalized people, the enhancement of the remission period, etc. And this could name under the umbrella title of the quality of the services rendered. Let's talk about the levels of the proof. So here we see the pyramid. And you can see the levels that are quite relevant for a scientific project or any new development. And we see that randomized controlled studies are at the highest level of the proof. And it could be principally critical for those projects that hope to go to the external markets. Initially, this expert potential should be included in there, and for that, during the design of a study, those conditions should be taken into account. Maybe it's also good to pay attention to the lower level, which is about the opinion of reputable specialists proceeding from the clinical experience and descriptive studies, though this is not provable, so to say. Now let's talk about the regulator's position. This is about the ideology of the process of introduction of innovative technologies in Russia. In accordance to the Federal Law 127, we see the definition of innovation, which is the product, process, the method of sales, or an organizing method that is much better than the previous ones. What's interesting here, the regulator supports the integration, starting from the clinical approbation and ending with the group. So indeed, a very important factor when we come to the calculation of investment attractiveness of the project. But let's take a look at something that's going on before the clinical testing and approbation. So this is the picture that actually demonstrates the current state of affairs in our area. Unfortunately, I couldn't place it in a readable format, but actually we can see different colors and the thickness of these colors, and they demonstrate the reality. This is the map of the demonstrative and investment services, together with the health net. Within the National Technological Initiative, we managed to get this kind of a picture accumulated. What's the most interesting for us here? Let's take a look. Above the green line, we can see all the services that were successful. And if you pay attention to the fact that after the second section here, which is called Proceed, over here in this part, there is almost nothing in here. So this gap reflects the precipice that I've shown you in the very beginning, the picture from the Nature journal. What can we see here? We can see that from the third level of technological preparedness, according to a TPLL system, which is about the readiness of the project, and right up to the seventh level, we currently do not have any fitting measures and instruments to support the projects. When it comes to the acceleration, funding, investment, which would be quite relevant for medical projects, because there are huge costs that should be borne during the clinical trials. And the very first presentation to the investor is possible only at the level 8. And taking into account all this, the support from funds actually ends at the level 4. So this is approximately the middle of this picture. And here I highlighted the strategies that are available for us, also from the same biotechnological cluster, and they allow to overcome these translational barriers. This is about the validation of therapeutical targets, the comparative analysis of candidate medications, and the comparison with the best practices, identification of biomarkers, and the last one here is the assessment of potential of new developments. Those are the stages within the translational study, based on the classification of National Institute of Mental Health in the US. And here I highlighted the stages during which we can be useful for you as the developers. And once again, let's take a retrospective look. Here you can see the systematic view. And this systematic view of psychopathology has been formulated not so long ago. So with what did we come to 2000s? At the conference in Dallas, it was devoted to the validity of translational psychiatric studies. Those are the conclusions that were drawn. There were some contradictory and disputable definitions of psychiatric symptoms. So people are psychosocial systems by themselves. Then there are very complex psychiatric symptoms, as I said. And for this, to overcome this, we could include into our practice the patients and those people that are taking care of them in the team of the researchers. And the last, but the most significant one here is about the significance of the psycho disease. How to overcome this? We could build some research that could be done in combination when it comes to the dependence between the target and the result. And the National Institute of Mental Health initiated a project which is called the Research Criteria in Domains. And it's actually quite similar to an approach that is used in systematic engineering. So it's a reverse engineering based on the principle as function. And here, you can see the central question. What is responsible for the development of dysregulation and dysfunction in these systems in the continuum of dementia from the norm to the pathology? And so far, we haven't come up with any clear response to that question. And within that project, we offered some metrics. In the original, they actually are called the criteria of the research area. And they'll allow to build some characteristic dynamic patterns to diagnose neurodysfunction in this range from the norm to the pathology. Here you can see the main sections of this metric. So a system of positive, valent, etc. And here, I'd like to shortly introduce the areas that, according to our view, are currently the most active ones when it comes to the introduction to the clinical and diagnostical practice. So pharmacogenomics, the vector delivery, connectomics, neuromodeling, and immersive technologies. He'll be very selective. As one of the examples of the translation, this is a medication, aducanumab. Unfortunately, all the rest of them did not reach the end of this route in marathon. Here you can see the efficiency criteria according to clinical improvements with an Alzheimer's disease. And here we can see the third phase of the trials. And we believe that the best results is the 23% in comparison to the placebo group. Those are the same results, just visualized on the graphs. When it comes to the multi-target medication, I believe that one of the most successful examples here is when we are aiming first and foremost at the security with the comparative efficiency with the medications that are already in the market and that are currently already applied. So together with our colleagues from Neuro, This is the Center of High Technologies at ChemRAR. We signed a memorandum this year, and within this memorandum we plan to organize the third phase of our trials, because we believe that this medication is a quite interesting one. This is the same medication and its indicators when it comes to the therapy of the Alzheimer's. Nanoparticles. Here, I'd like to underline the developments of Professor Alaoudin. We believe them to be promising when it comes to the search for new, efficient methods to treat Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's disease. Those are our hopes, and we believe that those are promising for the translation. And glycosphingolipids. Also, for the neurodegenerative diseases. And I believe that one of the most promising areas that is relevant for you, as for the developers of neurointerfaces, this is a connectome. We do hope that with the help of this area and developing this area, we will come closer to the understanding of the connections in our neurosystem that determine our cognitive and neurophysical processes. This is an example of a neuromodeling discern project. We call it a computer schizophrenic. This is a neural network that allows you to imitate the interpretation of some stories, like a retail. Here you can see the results that have been achieved within this project. Out of 8 tested scenarios of neurodysfunctions, the scenario with the memory and hypereducativities actually were provoked among the discern participants, and they were quite similar to those that we come across in real life. And this is an example which is unfortunately proved to be lost in translation once again. This is a method that was developed to simplify the life of the schizophrenics with the hallucinations. So this is avatar therapy. This is an example of an interface. And here you can see that in 2020, an overview appeared that was demonstrating the statistical insufficient efficiency of this method. We believe this method to be quite promising. However, this efficiency didn't prove to be quite good. And quite recently, we also made an overview connected to AR and VR technologies. So we took a look at the scientific publications across different countries. What requires our attention here? This is the fact that when we have some eating disorders, we see some improvements of some remote results. Also, when it comes to phobia and anxiety disorders, there is some positive dynamics of the conditions. And when it comes to the schizophrenia, there were also some improvements in self-estimation. It was done in China and Korea. However, today we see that these technologies prove to be quite difficult when it comes to the implementation. And to conclude, I'd like to offer you a quote by Dmitry Ivanovich Mendeleev. It's quite rough. The science is for service, and this is just the mean to reach some well-being. And by this, I'd like to thank you for your attention.